super delighted to welcome you all today. It's so great to look out and see lots of really, really familiar faces, so welcome, and lots of new faces. So really excited to get to know you and hear some of your views today. The plan for today is we're going to have a panel conversation. I'm joined with 4 pretty amazing people to help me out with that, talking really about a topic that is near and dear to the hearts of many of us. How do we start to get a groundswell, in my language, of momentum to increasing KiwiSaver contribution levels? I think, when we take that step back and we look at it, we can all recognise KiwiSaver's come a long way since its inception, but we haven't come far enough. So we know that there is still work to do. We know that contribution rates as they are just not high enough. We need people to be saving more. We need people to be engaging more. It's a really interesting thing when you kind of think about, is this the right time for this conversation? It's a hard environment out there today. We know that our members are struggling, industries are struggling, employers are struggling. We also know that, particularly for our market, we stand to benefit. So when contribution rates do go up, that's a benefit for us as participants in this market. The reason that we come together today to talk about it isn't for our own self-interest, but it is for the interest of New Zealanders, for Kiwis. We all have a vested interest in Kiwis getting to retirement and being able to afford it, and getting to retirement and not being surprised that it's not enough. So how do we help get the settings right on that? Are there things that we need to do differently? There is never a right time for this conversation. It's been a conversation we've had for a long time, but we need to move it from conversation to action. So part of what we'll do today, after the panel conversation, you will see pieces of paper on your tables. If you don't have paper yet, we will get that to you a bit later. We'll be asking you to do some work in your groups. Each of you will have a topic. Some of those topics I shared, we're looking at various cohorts. So government, what could we ask of government? What should government really be thinking about and doing? Also, members. What do members need to be doing, and how do we work with members to help them get on that curve, build up that retirement nest egg, and be more in control of where they are today? And employers as well. So there are loads of counterparts that have a vested interest in making the system work. It's going well, but we just need to supercharge it a wee bit more. So what I'm going to do today is hopefully lead a really great panel conversation. I think the panellists are fantastic. You can look at them and you know that they have such a tremendous passion for KiwiSaver, such a tremendous passion for what it does for the lives of Kiwis, but also such a passion for what it does for New Zealand as a society as well. So that's the thing that really motivates us and keeps us going and keeps us pushing into these conversations, as uncomfortable as at times they really are. So what I thought we would do is maybe start with one of the macro questions. Are the settings right? It's a big question. We know what the settings look like. We know what the settings were initially and where we are today. So when I think about where we are, KiwiSaver has gone through such a range of transformation over the years. I would hazard a guess or suggest maybe not always for the best, but we are where we are today, and now we need to take it into that future and forward. So Tom here to my left is going to help us understand some of the research that the Retirement Commission has done of late that shows some really interesting facts when you break it down. 53% of dollars in a KiwiSaver account come from a member. That for me was a little bit confronting. I kind of knew it, but I didn't quite know the quantum of it. 29% from employers, and that's the tax impost on that. Again, kind of knew it, but hadn't seen it quite that starkly. Then we're going to hand over to Anna. Anna's going to help us understand an employer's perspective. So she's done some great research out talking to employers, understanding their point of view and some of the things they think are important to us to be considering as a marketplace coming together around employer contributions. So Tom, what I might do is just hand over to you to give us a little bit more insight into that research and also help us really understand what's happening within our ecosystem today.
Thanks very much, Sharon. Hey, it's great to be a part of this conversation, and I'm mindful that there are many people here who have incredible perspectives on the system that is KiwiSaver, including some from our own team who are here today. I'm the personal finance lead at Te Ara Ahunga Ora Retirement Commission, and many of you will know that every 3 years we're legislated to have a review of retirement income policies that is due next year. We're anticipating that review have a lot to do with KiwiSaver, and on the on-ramp to that, this year you may have seen our paper Opportunities for Improvement that talks about many of these issues. The fact is that members are contributing more to KiwiSaver than government and employers combined. And when we're looking at the balance of that, if we went back to some of the early rhetoric, the early questions and answers, for example, with Treasury about what the intention was, and there always was a more equal intention between employers and employees in terms of responsibility for helping Kiwi save for the future, both because obviously it was going to lift standards of living in retirement, but also because it was funneling money here locally. The thought was locally to business and providing capital. So as we're looking at that, we're sort of thinking we've gotten away from that. We've gotten away from that balance. And if you look internationally at many of the systems, the retirement saving and investment systems that we admire, that we mentioned, whether it's Australia, the Netherlands, the UK, there's a much higher percentage of employers are definitely doing a lot more of the heavy lifting. Now, to your point about is this the right time? To me, this is actually the perfect time to be raising this, because although we know that we might not be able to do anything today, we can be putting the groundwork in place for the future when times are better, that we can actually put in the things that we want to and possibly right that balance so that more money can flow in that direction. So maybe that's a good start for this conversation. Thank you.
Hi there. I'm Marie-Lockyer, CEO from Pi Funds, and as Sharon touched on, now's the time to be talking about KiwiSaver. Now's the time to be thinking about policy change. I sit on the FSC as co-chair of the investment stream, and Murray and myself sit on a policy working group. We were working quite hard to set some policy settings for KiwiSaver. Recently, I popped in to see Minister Bailey to talk a little bit about some of the things we were thinking of presenting to himself and his colleague ministers in the new year, and some of the back work that was going on, which the panel will share with you a little bit later. But he said, don't come back if you don't talk to the employers. There's no point making the job hard for us, and we want to know what is the view of employers, because of course you are, as Sharon said, quite self-interested in terms of increasing contributions for KiwiSaver. So I said, okay, I'll go and talk to the employees, Minister Bailey, which I did. So I thought what I'd share is some insights, I guess, from the employers. This is kind of the first step of kind of starting to engage with a very important party in terms of KiwiSaver contributions. And he kind of took me back to when KiwiSaver started and said, what did employers think back when KiwiSaver started? Because I think the word was we were vehemently opposed to KiwiSaver. Their main concerns were that by introducing KiwiSaver with the employer-employee model, there would be increased costs. There was concern about compulsion. It really put the employers in a position of having to provide financial advice for their employees, and they did not think it would help with savings rates. He kind of then reflected back and said, well, has that held true? In terms of increased costs, I think, yes, employers felt that that did prove true, but only for a while, because very soon after it was built into salary packages and very quickly normalised. Setup was run-of-the-mill, and it's built into wage costs. In terms about Their concern around compulsion, well, yes, it was a fear, but actually it came more or less compulsory anyway because of the huge uptake. So employers are pretty okay with that compulsion aspect. They obviously look at the total cost to them and were worried about the complexity, but given the clearing system, there is no real challenges for employers the way KiwiSaver has been established. In terms of putting employers in the position of having to provide financial advice, he kind of gave the example of a factory in Mangere, and the workers would come in off the factory floor and say, oh, there's this KiwiSaver thing, should I enrol? And actually the managers, the supervisors had no idea. They felt at the time that it was really difficult being put in that position to provide advice. But again, no longer an issue because there's a lot more advice, a lot more information, stories, friends, family, and a far more developed industry. And in terms of their fear of it not helping with savings rates, probably they claim this is the one that was closest to coming true in that it's been mixed. There's obviously been increase in savings, but also noted some substitutional trends. So I think kind of reflecting where employers started, where they were quite opposed to KiwiSaver, all of the things they were worried about didn't really transpire. So then I guess I move on to the next question, which is how would employers feel today if we struck up a conversation around increasing contributions? And again, the general view was that the vast majority of employers would support KiwiSaver as they see it contributing to savings of their workforce. They see the advantage in Australia. They see that KiwiSaver has worked. Of course, the original fares didn't materialise. And they think it's great that their employees are exposed to the stock market and a good savings mechanism for young people. And it's probably fair to say that employers will take the same view as the general public, given that they are the general public in themselves as employers and as taking a responsibility for their employees. They also have a view, of course, that New Zealand Super may not exist into the future, so it's a good way of starting that savings for everyone. Employers are up for conversation around increases. They think it would be a far more nuanced conversation today than it was when KiwiSaver started. Big employers probably like it, and small employers would probably have mixed views, but more support than you'd think, which did surprise me somewhat, because they are close to the employer. In terms of, I guess, what do they see as the biggest challenge is of striking up those conversations around increasing contributions? There will be an added cost for a while, just as the same as when it came in. That would need to be overcome. But they believe that through system design, being long-run notice as to scheduled and planned increases well into the future, provisions for employers to ensure a steady phase-in, that could be overcome. So if we agree it could be a good idea and we can handle the temporary increase, then we just need to find the right time in the economic cycle to implement the changes. By giving notice, a signal of notice to employers and employees, then they'll know the what, the when, the how it will happen. And hopefully then we'll see some of the benefits that international players see in the KiwiSaver, in the superannuation space. And the final piece, I guess from the view of the employers, was that they would suggest that businesses should not tinker with KiwiSaver, that KiwiSaver really needs to be about retirement savings. First-time deposits are okay, but that's really it for withdrawals. They're concerned about creating wealth for the future and not paying in for their employees today for something that might well be used today, given that's not the purpose of it. So I think that was a really good summary of an initial view from a group of employers and something that us as the industry, as we kind of move towards engaging with government, need to flesh out further with a wider group.
Awesome. Thanks very much. Sorry, back to Tom.
I just wanted to add an anecdote to Anna's thing, because 3 weeks ago, an employer from down south, they're a broadband company, sat down with their employees, and the employees actually asked the employer that instead of a pay rise to increase contributions into KiwiSaver. And so the employer wrote into us saying, well, how do we achieve that if they want to not use the automated deductible amounts, like instead of 4%, whether they wanted to go to 5 or something like that. And they found that they could actually make it work.
That's awesome. The other bit of feedback I was just going to share as well, just in the foyer before talking with Tom and his colleague Elizabeth, one of the people that they know, their employer of a relatively young person, had said to this young person coming into the workforce, contribute 12%. Don't do 3, go 12. You're young, you've got time on your side. You're not going to use that money other than, going and buying cars, boats, holidays, maybe beer. Put it at 12. You can change it later if you need to. So imagine if more employers and more education was talking about that. So we're not waiting or leaving it until someone kind of figures it out for themselves. It's a lot to figure out for anyone. One thing I did forget to tell you guys, we are open for questions as well. So if you do want to submit a question, I will be looking at them throughout the course of the day. You can do it through the app. So find the speaker Q&A box on the app. We are in room 4. So look for that one. You'll figure out where we are. We'll see the questions coming through, and I'll have a look at them, and I will vet any questions that come through from my colleagues at the front table. I'm on to you guys. We're going to move over and start to look at it now from a member point of view, because members, again, are a massively important part of this conversation and this equation. We know that KiwiSaver conversations now are happening everywhere. They're happening at home. They're happening in airport lounges. I've heard them. They're fascinating. And they're happening at barbecues. Who even knew this would be a thing? But KiwiSaver is a part of our DNA. It is a part of our society now. As we've really covered, employers are behind it. New Zealanders are behind it. So how do we help them really get behind it a little bit more and get on that road for doing the right thing? What I'm going to do now is ask Murray if he can pick up a question for us and talk through. We know that people are under a lot of financial pressure today, but we also know that delaying and deferring is not really the right outcome for people. So what are the things that we can start to do and start to turn our attention to help people become better informed, make those better decisions, but also have a voice? So if New Zealanders, like employers, are thinking, we do need a change, how do we help them have that voice? Where do we help them have that voice? So that's one thing I'll ask Murray to start to pick up and talk our way through.
Thanks, Sharon. Yeah, I'm Murray Harris, head of KiwiSaver and Retail at Milford. Well, look, KiwiSaver's been going for 17 years and its 18th year, so it's transitioning from a teenager to a young adult. Maybe not quite like the teenagers some of us in the room might be familiar with, that seem to be very disengaged unless they're on TikTok, occupy a cave in your house that used to be a bedroom, only come out of that cave when the Wi-Fi goes off. And when they've been really nice to you, they're about to ask you for money. I think KiwiSaver's been a better teenager than that. Well, that's just my house, Simon. I don't know about yours. I know a lot of teenagers. But as we move into adulthood, we've got a couple of years to really make some significant changes to KiwiSaver to make it even better. But we do acknowledge and fully acknowledge the fact that it is pretty tough for people out there, and this has an impact on their household incomes. But when is the right time? It never is the right time. It never is the wrong time. And really, to get people to save through the good times and the bad, the only way to do that is through compulsion. I'd be really interested in the views of the tables and the workshop this afternoon to see what thoughts there are around that, because that is one simple solution, make it compulsory and everybody has to contribute through thick and thin. But I think the real issue is that people just don't know how to save. As an industry, we've got a responsibility, not only a fiduciary responsibility to manage the money well, but we've got to look after the members well. And so education and advice is really important so that people can see, well, they can set a goal, we can help them set that goal, and how do they achieve that goal? Because if they don't do that, they'll just keep doing what they've always done, and that'll be the bare minimum. I think some of the other improvements we could be looking at is incentives, because right now, other than doing the 3%, and most people will only match their employer, 90% of employers are doing 3%. So what's the incentive to do more than that? And as long as you're getting your 521 from the government, would you do more? You'd just go and take that extra income and put it somewhere else. You might save it somewhere else, but the temptation is to spend that, or you'll probably just spend it. So are there some incentives that we can provide around saving? And it might be increasing the employer contribution in an incremental way over a period of time to get to some other level, whatever that might be, 5, 6, 7, 8%. We look across the ditch to Australia, they're at 11.5 going to 12, obviously compulsory. They don't have the same non-means tested superannuation that we do, so we need to consider that. And then I think the third thing is the incentives around those contributions from a tax perspective, or some tax concessions, because without that, both employees and employers really have no other incentive. And if we want employers to come to the party a bit more, maybe there's some concessions for employers that could be provided to help them help their staff and help KiwiSaver members provision for their retirement. I know that's a cost to the government, and we know government are pulling the belt in as well, but it might be a short-term cost for long-term gain. So, really interested today to see what the discussion is around the tables and what thoughts and ideas we might have as a broader industry around improving KiwiSaver and taking it into adulthood.
Awesome. Thanks very much. What I might do, Simon, is just get you to pick up and add any thoughts that you may have into that topic.
Thanks, Sharon. Hi, everybody. Simon Power from Fisher Funds. Couple of things from me. First is just, you hear a lot, this isn't the time to be doing anything about contribution rates because we're in the middle of a cost of living crisis. And policymakers would be, I imagine, reluctant to front into that conversation, as Murray and Anna have both intimated. Actually, that's exactly the right time to do it. And it's exactly the right time to do it to start helping the public think about, and members think about, what might they do with any discretionary income that might come their way when the economic cycle turns. We don't want a situation where those decisions are made ahead of the opportunity to think about increasing contributions to KiwiSaver. The big thing for me when you step back from it is, I guess, two quick points. The first is, if you say 3 + 3 enough, there is a risk that the implied understanding is that that'll be enough, and it won't be. And so that is something that the constant repetition of the rhetoric around the current settings, that's going to be okay. And I'm just not sure that that's the right way for us to be thinking about it. I think the second thing is the risk in continuing to describe KiwiSaver's contribution at about $110 billion and the super funds' great work at around, I think it's about 75, unless somebody else tells me differently on the panel. It might be slightly more than that now. Is that both of these inputs into the New Zealand super and retirement discussion continue to be referred to as smoothing or lessening the burden on the taxpayer of the cost of universal superannuation. I think we need to start talking about this as a tripartite partnership to solve the problem, rather than one central course of funding and a couple of mechanisms at the margin. This has become a much broader conversation, and as our level of understanding develops over time, so is the way that we should describe the dilemma that we face with demographic and other issues coming our way. And Tom, I might be slightly off script, but I'd be really interested to know what the Commission's response to that might be as well. I'm actually in Murray's camp to the extent that some of these core settings should be looked at. If we're sure of them, then reinforce them. If we're not, it's an opportunity to have a broader discussion about them. Thanks,
Simon. So I just want to reiterate your point and expand on the power of defaults. Defaults are extremely powerful things, and when you set them at 3%, basically you're sending a message to the entire country that that's going to be enough, that that's going to do the trick, and we know that that's not the case for at least a certain percentage. In fact, a case can be made that higher income members should actually be doing a lot more in terms of saving. So what we're proposing, and again, this is that opportunities for improvement paper, is really, what if we set the default higher, at least 4%, but left the minimum, so that if there are members who actually need to keep it below at the minimum, but actually signal to all members that actually 4% or higher would be a lot more appropriate for your retirement savings.
Thanks, Tom.
Thanks very much, everyone. Look, I think probably some of the other things to kind of really bear in mind, while we might talk about 3 and 3, as we started out the day with, it really ends up being more like 3 and 2 and a bit, because you take tax off, so tax comes off before it goes into someone's account. So you're already well below 6% when you go into that net basis and what occurs in someone's account. We'll come back and we'll touch on that one a little bit more as well. One of the other things I did want to talk about, though, too, and again, this comes up quite often, is, does KiwiSaver work for all New Zealand? It's set out to be an environment that really supports all New Zealanders saving for their retirement, but we know intuitively there is a large cohort of New Zealanders that it still remains reasonably unattainable for. So our lower income earners, possibly our, some of our women in lower paid jobs as well, they're just not really getting to the footing that they need to get to. So should we be looking at some of the settings around that? And I'm loath to say tinkering with it, because changing settings is always difficult, and creating different rules for different people is also insanely difficult. But should we be looking at things like maybe the tax rate on employer contributions and the thresholds that tax rate kicks in at? So for lower income earners, they are paying a lot less tax. Should they pay no tax? Should it be mandatory for low income earners? So I don't know, pick an arbitrary figure and something we would need to work out. If for someone under $50,000 a year, should it be mandatory that members have to contribute? Should it just be mandatory that the employer contributes? So how do we start to level up the playing field a little and start to really think about really making KiwiSaver much more accessible for everyone who needs it, because everyone at some point does need it, and everyone does at some point get a massive kick out of figuring out that without it, they wouldn't have saved $5,000, let alone $10,000, let alone a deposit for a first home. So they are things I think that we can start to really think about when we think about what should the policy settings be. What I might do, Anna, is ask you really if you can expand on that a little bit more and start thinking about what some of those settings could look like to accommodate a broader range of Kiwis.
Sure. I mean, the timing, again, is really good, because we've obviously got the retirement income review coming up later this year. And government has talked about holding the long-awaited and overdue KiwiSaver review next year. So as we start feeding these thoughts in, now's the time to be discussing them as an industry. So we will be welcoming all your thoughts on the pieces of paper soon. I was just reflecting yesterday, I was reading in the Herald, the outgoing, after 5 years, Chief Executive and Secretary and Treasury, Dr. Carolee McLeish, made a comment that the increasing share of government transfers were going to the wealthy. Treasury has long advocated for slimming down of New Zealand super. And reflecting on that, I think a little bit with KiwiSaver, is that certainly those that are, let's call them wealthy, or let's call them kind of above average earnings, they're probably doing well in KiwiSaver, but they're probably doing well outside of KiwiSaver too in terms of their savings. So, that probably is at the detriment of a lot of those people in the lower average income brackets who are probably going to need KiwiSaver a lot more than the above average, that kind of don't either have the ability to save through KiwiSaver at the moment, don't have the education to save through KiwiSaver at the moment, and don't have the incentives to save through KiwiSaver at the moment. So, we started thinking about what are some ideas for those that may have to rely on New Zealand super. So here's a few. Government contributions. Should government contributions be targeted to lower income earners as opposing to continue to boost the savings of higher income earners? Number one. Number two, touching on something that Sharon said, should we decouple employer and employee contributions? So, the poor lower income earner in South Auckland who may not be able to afford to put their 3% in, and today, due to today's model, misses out on the employer's 3%. Is that fair? Should we look at lifting the tax income levels to reduce the tax paid on employer contributions for lower salary bands? All things I think that it's worth just us reflecting on as industry as we start fleshing out what those solutions may be and how we can present those solutions in the right way to government.
Fantastic. I think, probably the thing that I'd add to that as well is what's the point in time that we might think about increasing the mandatory contribution rate for employers to either get over that tax hurdle, so it is 3 and 3 net into a member's account, or, is it really relevant that tax is paid on employer contributions, and if so, at what level across the board? So again, interesting things for us to consider and work our way through. You guys will all be rapt to know that I've managed to break the laptop that they've given me, so if I do look a little bit distracted, that's why. I have got some questions, but, we'll figure it out. What I thought I might do, Murray, is see if you had something that you wanted to add into that as well.
Yeah, sure. When KiwiSaver was first designed, it was really designed as a middle market product. And look, I don't know if Simon wants to make any comment, but he was sitting on the other side of the fence at that point. And of course you were. And because you'd already been worked out, you were going to work for Fisher Funds. But, there's a whole cohort for which KiwiSaver probably doesn't really work that well because they've got such low income, they can't afford it. And so, even just a 1% contribution rate, it may be too much of a strain on the household budget. So there is, I think, a responsibility on whether it's government or employer to try and help those people, whether that's mandated. And then there's another cohort right at the other end who are getting all these benefits and employer payments and government contributions, and in the past, the $1,000 to sign up when they didn't really need it. And so if we think about the middle market, it works really well for, but what can we do to improve it for those that are really, really struggling? And look, in some cases, New Zealand Super will be sufficient for people in that lower cohort. But if, we really want to be bold and we want to really make some changes to KiwiSaver, they're going to make a big difference to our society, now's the time to do it. And I think we need to think about some of these, bold solutions across the board, probably less so for those that are well off and more so for the middle and lower end of the market.
What we've seen is that actually, a third of KiwiSaver members, 1 million people, basically have incomes of 20,000 or below. So this is a system like nothing going in, nothing's gonna come out. This is why if you were talking compulsion, it won't necessarily solve that. If you're talking about compulsion for members, if you're talking about compulsion for employers, then it becomes a bit more interesting. The trouble with all the talk about percentage contributions is we're always talking about percentage contributions. We're not talking about dollars. And we need to talk a lot more about the levels of dollars that are going in and what the outcomes are going to be. And thanks to the research, we're able to see a lot more about what the effects are going to be over the decades to come. So a lot of the inequalities, basically KiwiSaver could end up amplifying them. And so these are really big decisions.
I absolutely agree. And 100%, I would say what we are not doing is solving any inequality issues. What we are doing, I think, is compounding them. And that goes on a number of settings that don't just go to KiwiSaver specifically, but when you do have that opportunity to start to reset a landscape and think differently about the future generations, how do you do that? It may not be beneficial to someone in the next 5 years or 10 years, but go longer and think about those younger people today and how do you give them a better head start to close the gap into the future. So what I thought we'd do actually is I feel like we've saved the biggest question for last, maybe. I'm a bit nervous about this one, but we'll see how we go. One of the questions we really need to step into is who should drive this change? So who really is responsible? And, so what do we do really to start to take effect with that? Is it a combination? Does someone need to move first? And if they do, what do they do? So I do feel like this is a really career-limiting move for me because I'm going to ask Simon to lead into this one first. Thanks, Simon.
Thank you, Sharon. Look, I've thought a bit about this, and I think that the debate needs to be led by the members and by the New Zealand public. I'll just let me explain what I mean by that. So policymakers will pay attention to the view of members and the view of the public and are less likely, I believe, to react to industry and specialist reports being put in front of them and or their ministers. Also, I think that as we as an industry are thinking about how to approach a role that we might have in potentially changing the settings, I would step out a little bit on a ledge here and say, do not frame the debate in a way that tells the public or members what they are not. So don't frame the debate by saying New Zealanders aren't financially literate. Don't frame the debate by saying New Zealanders take too much risk. Don't frame the debate by saying New Zealanders aren't prepared for their retirement. All that does is alienate those members and the public from industry and those that have a certain amount of knowledge about where the industry should go. You have to frame the debate in a way that shows you understand the problem from the perspective of the member and that we're here to help solve that problem, which ultimately is making sure that they're able to live the lives they want in retirement. I think the challenge for the industry is to make sure that they are sharing knowledge in a way that gets away from this bifurcated view, which may or may not be correct, but may be perceived as, aren't you lucky to be having discussions with us, the experts? So that model is limited. Our responsibility, I think, should be more about saying we're going to share knowledge with you so that when we do sit down and have that advice conversation or that initial interaction, we're doing it having helped all parties at the table enhance their level of knowledge so that their understanding contributes to their own choices and their own understanding of how they want to interact with an organisation or financial products. It's an old kind of flip side from a previous life. Don't tell the people you represent or work for, don't tell them off. Help them and be alongside them, sharing that knowledge. So I think it's really, really important that policymakers and the industry don't patronise members or the New Zealand public on this view, that we work with them about it. So, good public policy is not born from parties who have an interest in the public policy outcome by telling other interested parties how much cleverer they are than the other parties involved in the debate. So I think I'd encourage us, and I know this is probably going to get the old pen scribbling on the piece of paper around each table later on, this knowledge, this information, this experience, this expertise that we all have is a privilege to share it with our members and customers, and with policymakers. So I would put on the hat of member first interests and their needs from well-constructed policy, and I would transmit that back to policymakers.
I might just jump in and say that I think it's all very good to say the members should lead it, but I think a lot of the members don't know what they don't know. So, yep, we can educate. I think the beauty of the KiwiSaver system is that it's owned and contributed to by so many people. So the members, the employers, the providers, the government, and I'd probably just move one step further in terms of the members leading it, to say we've got a great opportunity with members leading the debate through the Retirement Commission and the surveys and work they do with real New Zealanders and getting their views as they go through to the Retirement Income Review. We've started engaging with employers, and we'd love to do a similar. We would love them to do, to the point that it shouldn't be led by providers or the industry. We'd love them to do a similar piece around special interest groups and surveys with employers. And then that allows all parties involved in KiwiSaver to knock on the policymaker or the gatekeepers effectively for those changes with an aligned view. And they've been quite clear, don't keep knocking on our door unless you've got the views of everyone, because you need to make our job really easy to transmit these changes. So, I'd probably take it three-way.
I'll add to that from a government perspective, because ultimately, some of these things might require changes to legislation, and they're going to be the ultimate holders of the pen on that. When KiwiSaver was established, it was agreed that it would be reviewed, the policy settings would be reviewed every 7 years. That was done in 2014. I'm not talking about the default providers, it's quite separate. That was done in 2014, and it hasn't been done since. So we're a few years overdue, and so I think now's the time for us to be really coming together. And I agree with Simon's views. We can't just tell people. We do need to help and educate, but it's a collective. It's us as an industry. It's our members having the knowledge, and ultimately the government has to come to the party.
The one thing I'd add to the discussion is just it was brought home to me in Wellington this past week that actually government's role in this is also as an employer. There's a huge employer, so these decisions that are making will also affect on how they contribute to their employees. But it's also a time, and this is according to our surveys, when people are feeling uncomfortable about their financial situation, but they're incredibly engaged, is what we're finding. They're really engaged with their long-term planning too, and with their retirement planning. And so this is a great time to ask them, well, what is it we want? What is it you want? What is it we want this to become? And we have this system to compound wealth. What is it we want this system to, how do we get more people to get more out of it?
Yeah. Great feedback, guys. Probably the thing that I would add to that, if I thought back to some of the roles I've done in the past, it's true, like Anna's right, that people don't know what to do, but they want to know. And I don't think that's ever been quite as strong as it's been over the last incumbent time. People genuinely are looking for someone to help them make those better decisions, to help them figure out what to do. And we're not necessarily always talking about, full-blown financial advice. Conversations, education, recommendations. They're looking for us as providers to take a bit more leadership, to give them a little bit more guidance, but make it easy. Most and foremost, make it easy. So there's a few great questions that have started coming in as well. Thank you guys very much. What I might do is start with one, which is a little bit of a double banger. So it's rolling a couple of the themes that have come through together. So what should we do better at point of sale? So we're not talking necessarily just always about someone joining for the first time, but also when people are switching KiwiSaver providers. How do we ensure that we're having better conversations to help people make those decisions, not just about their provider or their fund, but their contribution rates? Going alongside there, there's a standard theme that always runs in our industry. Should I save for retirement or pay off my mortgage? Which comes first and which is most important? So what I might do, Murray, I'll hand that one off to you to kick us off on that.
On the saving versus paying off the mortgage? Or Yeah, it's a very good question. In terms of helping people, we need to. It comes back to this education and advice, and we need to save people from themselves. We saw it during COVID, and any of the providers in the room would have seen the amount of switching that went on from growth and aggressive funds to cash funds. We do a lot of work with our members in terms of education, and we're doing live streams. We offer advice. A lot of our members, probably 25% of our members, are advised. When Japan sold off 3 weeks ago and we saw that massive fall in markets, I saw the transactions coming through our online portal, and guess what? People were switching from growth and aggressive to the cash fund, and I thought, oh my God, here we go again. So, we're all very active and as providers in trying to educate our members, but sometimes you just can't help them from themselves. So we need to do better there. What can we do? There's obviously more education, more advice, things on your portals for pop-ups to get people to focus on the long term. I think, again, as Anna said, people don't know what they need. What's the goal? So if you set the goal and it's a long-term goal, and we can educate people to say, stay the course, don't panic when markets take a wobble, stay in the fund that you're in, and continue your journey to the goal, whether it's in 10 or 20 or 40 years' time. So I think that comes back to the other question about pay off the mortgage or save for KiwiSaver. Well, both, ideally. And there's plenty of jurisdictions around the world that do both because it's compulsory. We've got an option, and sure, paying off the mortgage, you might get equity in the house and all those sort of good things, but how many 65-year-olds still have a mortgage and haven't saved? So it's both.
Nice. Any other panellists want to pop in on that one? Because I do have another couple of questions to throw out.
No, I'd just jump in and say it's got to be both. I think the problem is, mortgages are taking longer to pay off. You don't want to wait till you're sort of 55 to then start planning for your next goal, which is retirement. Both.
The key thing that we do know is time is the one important asset someone has on their side when they're young, so make the most of it. The mortgage will be the mortgage, and it will exist and do what it does, but you can't make up your retirement savings. That's the really, really hard thing to do at the end of the day. This is a really kind of interesting question. So you think about kind of what New Zealand's been through over the course of the last 2 or 3 years with interest rate hikes and the pressure that has put both businesses and New Zealanders under for quite an extended period of time. We're really, really feeling it now, and you can see it throughout the economy. Should the Reserve Bank be able to use KiwiSaver as a mechanism to assist it with inflation? I feel like, Simon, I might throw that one over to you.
Because it was your problem.
Should the Reserve Bank be able to use KiwiSaver?
Yeah, so contribution levers, whatever it may be.
No, I think they've got enough levers.
It was debated, wasn't it? A number of years ago, there were some thoughts around increasing KiwiSaver contributions rather than increasing interest rates effectively. And Treasury did do some work on it. I can't recall where it fell down.
I think it generally kind of went into that catalyst of it all just felt quite hard. And did you want the Reserve Bank really to be using contribution rates to a long-term retirement savings plan to influence economic outcomes? That's my vague recollection of it, but I might be wrong on that, but that's generally where I've seen it go. Look, generally the sense for me is I'm not sure you want the Reserve Bank getting anywhere close to it.
I think that'd be one of the things that would really turn people off is the ability. There's already enough people out there who think it's a government conspiracy and their money's going to disappear. And you just look at the comments sometimes online and you go, where are these people getting this information? But that is what's out there. I think it would just turn people off.
I feel like that was a short, sharp one, guys? What do you reckon? This is probably the last one before we'll break you out into your groups. You will see the work boots on your desk. What we'll do at the end of this is also get you to present back. So make sure that you will capture your thoughts succinctly for whichever cohort that you're looking at. We will be floating around on the tables and we will give you a hand to complete that, but we will present back at the end of it. So last question to wrap up this one. Again, this is kind of a controversial question. And again, I'm not sure I even want to ask it, but we'll give it a go. And Tom, I might get you to ask this one first, so pay attention. If KiwiSaver was to become mandatory and employer contribution rates were to mandatorily increase, does that put additional pressure on providers to reduce their fee levels? And should it put additional pressure? So really, you're talking about more of a mandated approach to dropping down those fee levels as balances continue to grow.
We're all waiting.
I'm going to make you wait, actually, as I try to... Talking to this room, I don't want to go anywhere near this. Fees are a really interesting thing. It's another example of how we get caught up in talking about tiny little percentages, and it is, many of the people in this room count in basis points, hundredths of a percentage point, and I think there's enough to do just to educate people on how fees work without trying to influence and cap and do all these things that would change what effectively is more of a free market. Yeah.
I'll make it easy on you, Tom.
Why would you do
it? Do you want us to respond to that? Look, it's a scale game, right? So, yeah, I mean, if we do generate a bigger pool of assets and our overheads can come down, then, yeah, there is room for movement on fees, I would expect. But there's research out there which shows, we are already very competitive when you compare New Zealand and the size. It's only 110 billion to Australia and the UK. Thank you to one of our peers on that research, supported by Deloitte. So, we are already competitive, but yeah, absolutely. As the industry grows, the FUM grows, that creates scalability and does provide opportunities for fee changes. But, it's not about fees, it's about value for money. Right, and that's the point that I would make at whatever scale. It's about the value for money your members are getting.
Yeah, and I would also say probably it's about value for money. It's also from a member's perspective about return after fees. So let's focus on that because that's what's going to grow their nest egg. And then secondly, we've talked a lot about members not knowing what they don't know. So I don't think let's not jump straight to reducing fees, but let's reinvest some of those fees into good education, good tools to help them make the right decisions to grow their nest eggs into the future.
Do you want to increase or decrease? Just somewhat controversially then, I'll finish by saying I think they do know. So I've heard this, argument that we've got to help members know what they don't know. I've listened carefully to that. I don't agree. I think members know what they want and they know where they want to be, and our job is to get alongside them and help them get there. But they do know what they want and they do know what they need.
Fees? Did you answer the fees question?
So the last thing I would add into the fees question as well, I agree with Anna. It's not so much about fees dropping, but it is about increasing the level of engagement around the marketplace. So what do we do more of to go into the educational spectrum? Education's always a tough one to step into, so that's maybe not quite the right language, but tools, guidance, whatever you want to call it, how do we just get more cohesive as an industry around that so that we have better language, better aligned messages, and then collectively start to track some of those outcomes. So start thinking about the problem a little bit differently because it's not a fee problem or a fund problem. It's literally an industry problem. So how do we think about that one a little bit differently? I probably do have a slightly different view from Simon in that I think people are just making choices. They're just maybe not the right choice because they don't quite get it. Sometimes they do, but not necessarily always. So I'm going to hand over to you guys. I'm going to look around the room and see if I can spot Martin down the back somewhere with his hand up. So what we're going to do, you guys are already in tables. You've got some paper on your tables and you also have a piece of printed paper that you'll collect your feedback on. We'll take this feedback and also get you guys to present back towards the end of this session. But then it also goes into the work that FSC and others are doing to really look at the policy settings around KiwiSaver and starting to think about as an industry, how do we frame up this work? So what do we do with the great conversation that we've had today and the great ideas that we've had today and start to build out a meaningful program of work that's quite connected and starts to push into actions and moves away from discussion? So what I'll give you guys is maybe 25 minutes to have a chat around your tables, capture your thoughts, nominate the person on your table to give feedback. It's not boily. And we'll go from there. Thanks very much, guys.
Okay, so the first table we're going to choose is an employer's table. They were having a great conversation and built some good solutions. So who was your spokesperson? Here. That's a good excuse. Only this guy can read his writing.
Hi. Right, we've got a few suggestions here and ideas with respect to what role do employers have in developing and supporting a sustainable retirement saving system. We were looking for employees to provide or assist with advice and education to employees, being more proactive about that. We were also talking about employers having a good and robust process or settings for an effective KiwiSaver onboarding experience for new employees. Quite often, things around the, dotting the I's and crossing the T's do go wrong. And it's not a good experience for the employees, and therefore they become discouraged. In terms of how can employers take effective action to create and sustain a successful retirement saving system. Employers can contribute to employees' portion of the contribution for perhaps low or lower income employees, effectively a compulsory employer contribution for all employees, or even we've got other ideas like split pay increases to part KiwiSaver contribution increases. And another good idea would be to match, higher employee contribution rates with additional employer contribution rates.
Thanks very much, guys. Anyone got any questions on that? That was actually pretty astronomical feedback. I thought that was pretty awesome. I feel like no one's looking at me in the eye at the moment because they're really scared that they might be the next table. And I just wanted to say the table that I'm just standing casually close to now should not be looking at me because you are number 2 table.
Hi all. We had employee-based topics. There were 2 questions. Firstly, what role do employees and self-employed play in ensuring their own financial security? And secondly, what other strategies beside compulsion could effectively increase employees and self-employed KiwiSaver ownership of their retirement security? So, looking firstly at I guess what is the self-help roles that people can play if they're employees or the self-employed. There's some obvious ones here, such as contribute to the maximum amount that you possibly can, ensure that your contributions are being made constantly. Self-employed people, don't look at that singular plan of just selling your business, have the diversification, so still contribute. Don't take savings holidays, increase contributions as things such as your pay increases or your interest rates come down on your home ownership. We also had that New Zealanders should be voting for policies that support anything that increases their retirement savings. So that's anything from increasing contributions to whatever. On the other questions. So this is the strategies beside compulsion. The education and free advice. So we're picking up on a comment that Tom made earlier. So have guidance, but make it easy. So it has to be easy to understand for people. Also, just because we are invested as an industry, and I've taken out your bad words there, Maria, doesn't mean everybody is. So we need to, again, make it easy and make it fun and interesting. Remove complexity, so that could be anything from total REM to any parts of the legislation, for example, with KiwiSaver, that just makes it, again, difficult for people to understand because that just creates disengagement. Hold the media to account, so we see plenty of clickbait articles. There is very little in the mainstream media that is objective, educational type articles. And finally, just some comments sort of taking the Australian example for the self-employed. Have simple systems, have easy guidance, have mechanics to save, and in the employer space as well. So people can contribute more than 3%, which most people do. Educate your staff that that's a possibility and that it's really easy and all you need to do is tick a box on a form and it's as simple as that. So that's us. Thank you, Sharon.
Does anyone have anything that they would add to that? Don't go all silent. It's not a test. Well, it might be. Not contributing is not a pass mark. Just saying. You're all such a well-behaved group of people. I've never, ever, ever facilitated anything where people have not wanted to say something. Generally, it's been harder to keep people quiet than not.
We'll talk, because you asked so nicely. But I can't remember what we decided, so I'll have to have a look. This was a free-flowing conversation, so we ignored the questions. That got us off to a really good start. Oh, thank you. We've killed total REM. We've decided that has to go because we figure it actually punishes lower paid younger workers more than anyone else. We've decided that the employer will contribute 3% irrespective of whether the employee contributes, because we're quite generous like that. We're going to remove ESCT from employer contributions. On the structural side, we also want to iron out the sort of strange system where as an employee you can contribute 3, 4, 6, 8, 10. Seems a bit of a nonsense to arbitrarily pick those percentages. Instead, pick a percentage you like, stick with it. We're removing SFH on the basis that the employer is going to be contributing, and FSH in respect of your own savings will be centralised with work and income. Go guys. And tax-free, we're removing the tax on contributions coming in. We're going to tax you on your withdrawal on retirement. And we'd like to see enhanced retirement tools, particularly projection tools, so that people can play around and see just what a difference it makes to their retirement income if they move up the percentage pathway a little bit more. And for the final complexity for payroll officers, we also felt that percentages weren't always so very meaningful. So possibly we'll let you contribute a dollar amount, because most people think about their salary and wages in dollars rather than percentage points. So there we are, we've solved it all.
Fab. And so for me, what I'm going to be doing is arranging an audience with the government and Elizabeth. Look, I would say that was a really outstanding list, so thank you very much for coming to the party and indulging me. All right, we have lucky candidate table. Look, they can't wait. Hey.
Thanks. I think, don't know how many people in the room were around when at KiwiSaver's inception, good few number of us. A good few, many of us. I think if we reflect back and have a look at KiwiSaver's success in terms of attracting membership, one of the big reasons for that were the somewhat juicier incentives dangled in front of us back at that time. And I think that if we're going to get employers more interested, they need to have similar tax incentives in front of them for their contributions and for their arrangements. And I think that's where we'll get the engagement with the employer and then with the government, because the employer's not really, I feel, and others may disagree, but I don't think the employer is on their own. Particularly small, medium enterprises have the resources to engage on this subject. And so, we have, it'll be legislators. In fact, we said, we crossed out the ask of employers at the top of our cards here, and we put legislators because, we're talking about the KiwiSaver Act, we're talking about tax settings, and that all comes from Wellington. So I think FSC is in a great position to advocate, for that engagement, and that's where it should start. Other things that we had on our list, we think more flexible levels of employer contributions. I think the current settings, as this table over here also touched on, are somewhat arbitrary and quite restrictive. We think total base remuneration also has to go. I mean, to date, I think that's employers' most indelible contribution to KiwiSaver is that, and there's been plenty of media coverage of that over time. For employers' part, we think they do need to reinvigorate their support for their employees. They need to provide seminars, information sessions. They need to have on-hand offer documents, which used to be a big part of lunchrooms when KiwiSaver first began. I think that's probably faded into insignificance now, and you don't often see those. And they need to partner with providers to for those things. So that's something, and that kind of engagement, employers will be able to connect with their employees, and I think that any opportunity that an employer gets, that's a valuable touch point for them. A couple of other things. I think we're kidding ourselves if we don't think employers are cost sensitive. I think that is the elephant in the room here. They all are. Those of us with actual teenagers, who've entered the workforce and are trying to get jobs and sign up to KiwiSaver, etc. There are some big pressures on them to understand what's going on, and I think it's fair to say that employers need to play a bigger role in that. Also, another thing, employee benefits. There needs to be more options and flexibility around KiwiSaver. For example, annual leave as opposed to some extra employer KiwiSaver contributions is one idea that came up at our table.
Thanks very much, guys. Just before we hand over to probably our final table, one thing I did just want to throw out. Does anyone want to throw out any other views that they may have? I think we've had a good discussion, a good combination of views. I think there's some interesting things that have popped up as well, which are really fascinating to sit down and explore. But I just want to make sure everybody has an opportunity to put out any ideas that they're thinking about that they would like to be considered within the frame of today.
I guess the good thing about these sessions is you get to hear other views, and there's been a couple of views today from Simon, also from the questions we've got that do reframe the question a bit to taking that member focus, and I also was really interested in Anne-Marie's conversation she had with the minister, where essentially she was sent back out into the wild to canvass the view of employers. Where I think there's a connection with us as industry is in helping to lead that conversation, but framing it from a member perspective in a way that they understand, get in behind, and then we really create some sort of advocate network. And just coming back to the sort of keeping it simple way, I think something like, and this is my marketing hat for the day, something like 10 and 10, where we say, right, in 10 years' time, we'll be at 10% KiwiSaver contributions. And that can be then sold, saying over 10 years, you can do sort of 0.5% a year as an employer and get a couple of free years in there and get us up as an industry to 10%. And there's barriers that need to be overcome, such as removing total REM and decoupling employer contributions from employee contributions, for example, so that you can make it all employer contributions. But that shouldn't be insurmountable. I think the key thing is getting that message out there, getting the support of the not just industry, but also the population. That's 3 million plus people in KiwiSaver, and that's where the real power will come from. So that's my thoughts.
Thanks, Sharon. I was just thinking about Johnny's comments, actually, and just want to present an alternate view. The question that was in my mind was, do we want small and medium enterprises focusing their energy on KiwiSaver and on upskilling their staff around KiwiSaver? And where I get to on that is actually no. We want small and medium-sized enterprises in New Zealand to be really, really bloody good at what they do, and we want them to be competitive in the global marketplace. What we need to do is actually get the macro settings right so that people don't need to think about KiwiSaver. The fact is, there's a very long tail of people in New Zealand who are never going to get to the point of financial literacy where they can really make good decisions for themselves. And trying to focus a huge amount of effort on that is kind of, I think, futile. Rather, we need to focus on getting the actual macro settings right to make sure that, and that there's a really clear pathway so that employers know what's coming. They know that they're going to have to pay higher, that they need to pay everybody. They're going to have to pay higher and higher rates in the future. And then they let the market determine what the impact is on wages and the like consequently, rather than trying to, focus on them, get them distracted on things that they otherwise shouldn't be distracted with. So just a thought.
Thank you. Look, I think that was actually really insightful. I think you go back to a lot of the conversations that we have as an industry and even as individuals within our own cohort to people that we know, we quite often tinker around the edges, hoping that the sum of the edges will get us to where we kind of need to be long term. I'm not entirely sure that will cause the sea change that we need to occur. So macro settings are insanely important. And setting an agenda that gets us on a pathway to that is also incredibly important. Signalling intent is probably one of the most strong things that we can ask for and require to help people get to where they need to be. It's not a short-term fix by any stretch of the imagination, but not doing anything is probably one of the biggest, in my view, it's just in my personal view, it's one of the biggest detriments that we can possibly do to New Zealanders. So ignoring it doesn't solve it. It just makes it worse. One last table to just wrap up with. I am aware that I'm standing between all of you and a drink and a conversation. So we'll wrap it up after this table and get around to enjoying each other's company.
Thank you. No pressure on that one. Look, I think everybody's covered anything we've written down, but our questions were around the ask of government and what are the government's responsibilities in ensuring Kiwis save enough for a comfortable retirement. I think it's a no-brainer, we'd all agree. These are our elected representatives. We've got an ageing population. We've got a retirement savings gap crisis. So, of course, it's their responsibility to get the settings right, to get the balance right, to help and encourage people to have a dignified retirement. I think we need to keep banging that drum. The politicians will listen if we raise our voice, for sure. As for how can the government balanced regulation and incentives to create a sustainable retirement savings. I mean, this is a little bit of my personal view. I think the design of KiwiSaver, when it was originally put in place, was pretty good. The introduction of the ESCT threw that design out a lot. And so we think that should be removed. And if you have to sweeten it for government to make a decision by means testing super or removing contributions, well, that could be some thought. So we might wrap it up there. But the really interesting thing I learnt today was the largest KiwiSaver provider in New Zealand, the employer, doesn't make contributions for their employees. I didn't know that. So...
Interesting, really interesting. Thanks very much, guys. Please leave your bits of paper on the table. We'll clear them all up. We will take everything away and come out with some thoughts and actions and maybe hopefully start to drive a bit of a sea change. Thanks again for coming, guys. Talk to you over the night. Bye.